Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. Dallas Mavericks. They have been playing some interesting basketball. And right now, if the playoffs were to start today, they would not be in the postseason, despite having Luka Doncic, who is, in my opinion, one of the best basketball players in the world right now. And I think there's a really good argument to say that he's top three. You could maybe even argue that he's a top two player in the world right now. And I think there's a lot of vindication to that. However, this team just isn't winning as many games as you would like to see them win. Now, it's a really tough Western Conference. If they win 2 games, a couple teams lose their next game or two, they could easily jump up to like 4th in the West, right? Nothing is set in stone at this point, the time I'm recording, but there's room for improvement for this team, and there's still some flaws that I've been talking about for a while with this team. Since trading Kristaps Porzingis, they just don't have rim protection. They went out, tried to use their taxpayer mid-level exception on JaVale McGee. He lost the starting job within 2 weeks of the season, and quite frankly, just isn't the answer there. I think he's still a beneficial piece to have on the roster, but you just can't rely on him to play more than 15 to 20 minutes a game, and that's pretty generous of me as well. Saying that, and the issue here, too, you lose Jalen Brunson. Spencer Dinwiddie, he's been the next man up. He's playing pretty well. He's averaging around 17 points a game this year. So you say, hey, that's a nice piece to have around Luka. Well, they still need another ball handler. I'm hoping Jaden Hardy for the future can become that, but they don't have one right now. And I think there's some other pieces still missing on this team. I still think that they need another wing player. Josh Green's been somewhat consistent for them this year, but come playoff time, I just don't know how reliable he'll be for them. I still think that they're missing that type of player behind Reggie Bullock and Dorian Finney-Smith. So really, we're looking for rim protection. We're looking for another wing that can defend out on the perimeter, looking for another ball handler, and the three-point shooting this year has just been a little bit abysmal. Reggie Bullock's taken a significant step back from where he was last 2-3 seasons, and that's a cause for concern for sure with the Dallas Mavericks. If Reggie Bullock's not hitting his open shots, he pretty much brings you nothing offensively as someone who doesn't really dribble the ball super well. And anyone who watches the Mavs knows exactly how bad he is in that component. And he just doesn't drive the basketball that efficiently either. So you have Luka, and the rest is kind of question mark right now. I really like some of the pieces still on this team, but the reason that we're doing this video the way that we're talking about for potential trades here for the Mavericks, usually I do these trades with an end goal in mind of already having these trades built out. I think it's important to talk through this roster and see what the tradable contracts are. Spencer Dinwiddie's a player the Mavs are not going to look to trade. Tim Hardaway would be available, but he's 30 years old and owed a lot of money. So he's not really a positive value player in a lot of trades. Exact same situation here with Davis Bertans. He is a negative value in most trades. He's one of the worst defenders in the NBA. Nobody wants this contract. Dorian Finney-Smith is a great contract. Teams are going to want him. The Mavericks are not going to want to give him up. Dwight Powell, he's a money matcher here. Doesn't really give you a ton. Now, no, these stats here aren't accurate. These are from after the first, 5 games of the season or so. Dwight Powell has regained that starting center spot. That's part of the issue here. Reggie Bullock, the Mavs will not look to trade Maxi Kleber. They don't want to trade JaVale McGee. Once the recently signed restriction is passed on December 15th, he will be trade eligible and someone that I think the Mavs would like to include in packages. Josh Green could be trade eligible. Ntilikina is. Pretty much everyone else on this roster, not named Luka Doncic, and in my opinion, Dorian Finney-Smith is someone who we could see get traded. Now, I don't think Dinwiddie's going to be someone who does get dealt, but if he's required in a trade, I think that they would look at it. So let's look at some of the potential deals here that make sense. And I want to start with Detroit, actually. Shout out Pistons fans as well. I know you guys, how much you care about your team. So shout out to you guys for sure. As you can tell, I'm a Mavs fan, but I'm not going to be biased about this. I cover the entire NBA, not really too concerned about it. So let's get into it here now. And let's talk about who we could potentially see getting traded to the Dallas Mavericks. And Saddiq Bey is one of those players that reportedly right now, Troy Weaver and the Pistons are potentially shopping. I don't quite understand it. I think Saddiq Bey is a nice player. They went out and traded for Bojan Bogdanovic and then gave him an extension. Does that make someone like Saddiq Bey expendable? I don't think it should, but there's rumors that potentially could be on the table. So for the Mavericks, this would be one of those great players that they would love to add. So what would it cost to get a Saddiq Bey? Well, for money matching purposes, you maybe look at a Josh Green, and this is not going to be something that goes through, right? So the Mavericks would essentially have to give up their first round pick. The issue, though, is they're owing their 2023 first already to the New York Knicks, which means that 2025 first would be the one that has to go because of the step-in rule. They can't trade that 2024 first until draft night after their pick's been made. So a trade would have to look something like this. The Pistons, I don't think, are just going to give up Saddiq Bey, right? That's not going to be just for Josh Green 1-to-1. And then if you're the Mavericks, you say, does Saddiq Bey really put us over the top like that? No, I really don't think so. I think Saddiq Bey is a really nice young player to have. He would fit Luka's timeline perfectly because I think he's a ready contributor, but he's not going to really elevate the ceiling for this Mavericks team, in my opinion. I think he's going to elevate the floor slightly. It definitely shores up your playoff rotation a little bit. But right now, the question is, does this team have enough to get to the postseason? This doesn't really solve the question marks about rim protection. This doesn't solve the question marks about a secondary ball handler or a tertiary one if you include Dinwiddie into that conversation. So this here, for me, probably kind of around the value the Pistons would want, at least one first-round pick. Maybe you see a second-rounder in here as well. You get a young player back who was in the same draft class, picked, I believe, 5 picks later, and essentially you get an extra first-round pick out of it if you're Troy Weaver. For me, though, I don't think Detroit should trade Saddiq Bey. I really don't. And I don't think the Mavericks should really go all in on this type of trade. And you say all in, they're only giving up one first-round pick. Because of this, they couldn't trade their 2024 first, their 2026 first. So basically, the only 2 picks that they could trade then at that point would be 2027, 2029. And it really limits your flexibility from Dallas's perspective. When we go into the second trade offer here, there's some other teams out here, right, that still can make sense. Charlotte has completely free fall, and this team is in the Victor Wembanyama sweepstakes right now. And there's a few players that do make sense. Gordon Hayward scores the ball very, very well. I think he's one of the more underrated players in the league. Yes, he's dealt with a ton of injuries, but when he plays, he's really good. I think that people really underestimate how solid of a player he is. Another guy who could make sense, Terry Rozier, 28 years old. He's on a long-term contract. Could the Hornets look to get off of him and kind of turn their eyes to fitting a little bit long-term at what, LaMelo Ball, who's only 21 years old, he's going to turn 22 this season. You don't need to hold on to all these 28-year-olds. Now, Terry Rozier is a good young player still. 28 is not old. He's like 5 years left in his prime, which is why this makes sense for Dallas. But Charlotte's going to need pretty good compensation, which is where you see here why Dallas is going to struggle in some of these trade discussions. Tim Hardaway Jr. is a long-term contract that I don't think Charlotte would want to eat here. Davis Bertans is definitely a long-term contract that Charlotte will not eat unless there's more draft pick compensation in here. Dwight Powell, Reggie Bullock, you'd have to put the two of them together to get to that 125% basically. Obviously, that'd be a 1-to-1 match. You could do something like probably in here of, Dwight Powell, JaVale McGee, and Josh Green or Ntilikina. But then you're giving up more and you're still not really addressing that rim protection element, which I think is one of the biggest concerns here. Terry Rozier is really the player that I think makes the most sense. Mark Williams, Kai Jones, these are still 2 young bigs that I think the Hornets believe in. Mason Plumlee, I just don't want to see him in a Mavericks uniform. I'm going to be honest about it. I just really have no interest in that. So when you're looking at this, it's just hard to line up a trade. Let's just say theoretically it's Tim Hardaway Jr., and the Mavs say, hey, we'll give you that 2025 first for this and, maybe a 2027 second round pick. Again, still to me, this is a hard sell for Charlotte, which the point of this video here is partially to talk about how Dallas is going to have a lot of issues making trades here at this point, just because the players that are good that they want to keep are the valuable players that other teams are going to want. And their contracts just don't line up that great because they have some of these bad contracts like Hardaway Jr., who I don't think is necessarily a bad contract, but it's a little rich and a little long right now. Like if we get into next year, you're looking at, 1 year left after this one. That's not too bad. But right now, 2 years left, it feels a little bit worse. So you're going to have to give up some draft pick compensation. Then you're asking yourself, does Terry Rozier really move the needle that much for Dallas? And the answer for me, again, is probably not. So it's hard to see either team wanting to make this move, honestly. I think the Hornets would be getting the better end of the stick here narrowly, but I don't think Terry Rozier, is a player they want to give up for free either. So it's kind of tough either way. This would help Charlotte probably bottom out a little bit more. I was going to talk about Gordon Hayward to the Mavericks. It's just kind of hard to see that being a realistic outcome, though, in my opinion. Then we get into the third team I want to talk about here, and it's actually in-state, and it's the San Antonio Spurs. And everyone knows who I'm going to talk about here. There's one key player I keep bringing up, rim protection, and he's going to be one of the most valuable players at the trade deadline here. That's Jakob. He is clearly a player that I think a lot of teams are going to have interest in, and I think Doug McDermott's another player a lot of teams are going to have interest in, and they both really fit what Dallas is still needing here at this point, which is rim protection. Jakob, one of the more reliable rim protectors. He does a really great job boxing out, ending defensive possessions, and would be a significant upgrade for Dallas defensively. And then Doug McDermott, again, the Mavs just aren't hitting enough shots around Luka right now. Luka is playing at a historic usage rate, around 38%. I do not know his number after the Boston game, but I know it's up there. It's around 40%, and it's a high number. I think it's the right move to play through them as much as they are, to be honest with you. But you need players to execute off of that, and quite frankly, they haven't been. So Doug McDermott, someone who can do that. We know he's such a consistent shooter, has been since his days at Creighton, and he's not going to waver in that by any means. So here for San Antonio, you could look at a few different options. This is $23 million going out. Let's say Tim Hardaway, and in addition to that, let's say that the Mavs have to give up Josh Green because, the Spurs want some young player back in this. Josh Green would be the young player. We're probably looking at that 2025 first. Again, though, this is hard to see the fact that the Spurs couldn't get a better offer for these guys. You could argue that realistically, they could probably get 2 second-rounders on the open market for Doug McDermott and at least a first for Jakob. Here, the Mavs' only selling point is, hey, we're giving you Josh Green for free, basically, here. And right now, you're not at a spot, really, where you're going to go out in free agency and spend anyway. And maybe for San Antonio, they could look at Tim Hardaway Jr. and say, he's not that bad of a player. If we're able to give him a little bit of a role here, let him showcase what he can still do, because I think Tim Hardaway Jr. can still fill up the basket. I think he's still a very good shot creator and somebody who, when he's hot, he's a very efficient scorer. He could maybe build up his value, and San Antonio could say, hey, we're going to trade him a year later, kind of like what I believe they're doing with Josh Richardson right now, just with after trading for him from Boston. He's been in a spot now where he's been able to play pretty well. He's put up some nice numbers in certain games, and I'm not a big believer in Josh Richardson, but I know he's somebody who teams around the league are at least interested in, maybe the Los Angeles Lakers. So maybe the Spurs can sell themselves on, maybe we can flip Tim Hardaway Jr. later. Again, though, the whole point of this video, it's difficult for the Mavericks to go out and make trades. And I don't really see this as a super likely outcome for Dallas still at this spot. And then let's get into the fourth team. And this is the team that I want Dallas to make a trade with. But it's kind of hard because this team keeps winning games, and that's the Indiana Pacers. You see, again, this is not updated. 8 games in, they were 3-5. They've been on a roll. Tyrese Halliburton's such a good young player. Pacers fans, if you're watching at this point, you've got to be so happy about the Domantas Sabonis trade. I know the Kings are hot right now too, but wow, Tyrese Halliburton is such an awesome player for the Pacers, and he's someone who's going to be really valuable for them. But now for the Pacers, who would the Mavs want? There's 2 guys here, and this is the best outcome in my opinion for Dallas. Myles Turner and TJ McConnell. Those are the 2 guys that I think would really fill some holes here for the Dallas Mavericks. Myles Turner is averaging about 3 blocks a game this season for the Pacers, and when you actually watch him, a lot of the skill set that he possesses as a rim protector stands out. I think one key game this year that really popped in my eyes was against Denver. He really forced Nikola Jokic into some tough shots around the rim. Now, Jokic is such a good player. He's able to finish a few of those. But for the most part, Jokic actually looked a little overwhelmed by Myles Turner's defensive presence. Not that that's something you are going to get every single night, but even the fact that Myles Turner was able to do that one night is insane. Usually Nikola Jokic is someone so good who doesn't get bothered. Myles Turner, capable of doing that. He's been a frustrator in the NBA for the last 2-3 years. His block numbers are through the charts, but his actual defensive impact is more than just the blocks. And I think that's the important part here when you look at rim protection. And then TJ McConnell's that backup point guard that Mavs fans wish Facu Campazzo was. Someone who, he's a good pace setter. He knows how to run a second unit. He's done that his entire career. You think back to when he was in Philadelphia behind Simmons. Now in Indiana, he's been super reliable for them, a part of a really good second unit with Benedict Mathurin. I don't think the Pacers really want to give up either of these 2 guys. So it's going to be tough to go out and get this type of deal done. Here, though, you look at the money, $26 million. A guy that I know really, really likes Tim Hardaway Jr. is Rick Carlisle. Rick Carlisle loves Hardaway a ton. Now, when you make a move like this, Hardaway doesn't necessarily fit this team as well. But if we're talking about trying to rebuild someone's value, Rick Carlisle is the guy to do it for Tim Hardaway Jr. He did it in Dallas. Part of why Hardaway's got this contract he's on right now is Rick Carlisle and some of the adjustments that Carlisle actually impacted on Tim Hardaway Jr.'s shot. I think that it's a natural fit back into Indiana, playing under Carlisle in whatever role that may be, especially if a Buddy Hield trade does come to fruition. You can maybe look at the Pacers here saying, look, we're getting a reclamation project here on Hardaway. We're also going to get a young player in Josh Green, who I know I've been including him in all of these trades. Basically, from the Mavs perspective, you have to get to the money threshold. These two contracts are the ones that make the most sense for Dallas to give up in trades like this. And from Dallas's perspective here, you're going to have to give up some picks. And this is one where you're going to go a little bit more in on. And I don't love that perspective here. 2 first-round picks in this trade for Myles Turner. And yes, that's a lot, but Myles Turner is 26 years old. That's kind of the difference here between where you're at with some of these other players. Myles Turner is 26 and he's a perfect fit. He provides the rim protection. He's going to block shots. He's a really good pick and roll partner, but he can also step out and hit the 3 ball. He's going to be reliable for you. I do think this would make the Mavericks a lot better right now. I firmly believe that. McConnell would really clean up some of the second unit. It would help lower Luka's usage just a little bit, not too much, but it gives you another competent ball handler who knows how to run a team. And Myles Turner is somebody who, when it really comes down to it, you can keep him on the floor because he's a good defensive player, but his offensive game doesn't waver either. And you can't quite say that about Tim Hardaway Jr. at times and also Josh Green. Those 2 first-round picks are a lot to swallow, but Indiana right now has kind of got a stronghold with where they're at. They've got a pretty good record. They've been playing really good basketball. They've got the Lakers probably calling every single day about Turner and Hield. So if they're going to make a deal, this is where the Pacers would say, hey, we need 2 firsts to get something done. And at this point, the Pacers would still have Buddy Hield to trade. Maybe they could still squeeze a first out of the Lakers for him. And then that's where you see the real benefit here coming for Indiana is netting 3 first-round picks for the trio of Myles Turner, TJ McConnell, Buddy Hield. Be a pretty good start to their rebuild while also bringing in Josh Green, and who knows, maybe next year they can flip Tim Hardaway Jr. for a couple seconds, maybe a first of his own if things go right. I don't love this overall package for Dallas. I think this overall package makes sense for Indiana, especially closer to the trade deadline if they do start to lose a little bit more. There's no guarantee they do. If they keep playing well, they're not going to make a move like this. But I think this is the best case scenario for Dallas in terms of the players that they would get. I think Myles Turner and TJ McConnell would be the 2 best fits onto this team. But again, nothing is a guarantee here. I think Dallas is going to have a really hard time in the trade market keeping up with some of the other offers out in the marketplace. So I would be surprised if the Mavericks get a bigger trade like this one done. But I think it's important to know kind of what they have for the trade deadline season that's coming up here. We're going to have trade previews for all 30 teams in the NBA talking about what they have to offer, what kind of players they have, what their contracts look like, future draft pick situations, what do they have to offer. So it's going to be a ton of NBA trade content coming out. So make sure you guys hit that subscribe button. Also leave a like on this video if you did enjoy. Thanks again, everyone, so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.